Well, good evening and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk About Sunday, except this week we're not talking about Sunday, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm Jason.
And I'm Joe.
And this evening we are joined by Joe's wife, Heather, who is a psychological wellbeing practitioner. And if you don't know what that means, all will be explained in a minute, hopefully. But welcome, Heather. It's great to have you with us.
Thank
you. We'll have a good chat, hopefully. So a bit of background, I guess, because it's we don't normally do, or we might do this more in future. So our 12th episode. So who knows what we normally do. But we talked about we touched on mental health when we were talking about the first episode in this series, or the first service in this series of re-emerging, and thinking about how people have perhaps been affected. And I'm sure we can all appreciate that the pandemic has impacted everyone. It will impact different people's well-being in different ways. And it's difficult to measure, but there are a number of studies, and Megan's given me some studies, some stats to help. But one study found that 1 in 5 adults were likely to be experiencing some form of depression during the first lockdown. And this was almost double the figure from before the pandemic. And for the majority of people, the study says this included feeling stressed or anxious. And another study found, and I'll put links to both of these in the into the comments in a second. Another study found that more than half of adults and over 2/3 of young people said their mental health got worse during lockdown. Interestingly enough, the study also said that some people felt their mental health had improved. I can kind of imagine why. Perhaps certain stresses were taken away during lockdown, but certainly the majority of people in those studies have seen or felt their mental health deteriorate during lockdown. So we've invited Heather on to talk to us and help us perhaps understand a bit more about mental health and how lockdown is affecting people. Heather, do you want to explain what you do and what is a psychological wellbeing practitioner?
What a question. Well, I'll try. So psychological wellbeing practitioners are trained to support people with mild to moderate sort of common mental health problems, so anxiety disorders, depression in particular, and we do that with techniques that are based on a type of talking therapy called cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, which is a really popular, very effective form of talking therapy. It's sort of widely available on the NHS in the UK. And I work for a service called iTalk, which is the talking therapy service for the majority of Hampshire, which is part of both the NHS and Solent Mind, the mental health charity. And we provide talking therapies to our population using these CBT techniques.
Great.
Super.
Help. It's
yeah.
Come up in a few sentences, but there you are.
No, that's cool. I think what was it? Someone sort of described PWP as kind of like, is it like a GP but for mental health? Is that a good?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how Joe likes to
about?
describe it in particular, and it's a good way of describing it, because we do sort of try to have a really good knowledge about a huge variety of mental health problems, so that we can direct people to the right place and offer the most appropriate support. So yeah, it's a good way of thinking of it.
Cool. Well, we have some questions, or Joe has some questions like we'd normally have, but I know that we don't want to put you on the spot too much, so we'll probably have a good chance to talk them through and see. Some people have been contributing some questions through Slido. Actually, I'll just share that quickly now so people can see. There's a link in the description for the video, but also I'll just share our Slido screen, which is this one. Hopefully, there we go. Super. So you can join at slido.com. I have 2 questions in there already, and there's a few more that Joe's been collating. If during the course of our chat this evening, you've got another question that you want to pop in, either pop it in the YouTube chat or pop it in Slido, and we'll try and get on to talk about it. But otherwise, Joe, you can start firing those questions away.
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess the reason why we've kind of mainly decided to bring you on, Heather, is obviously because a couple of weeks ago we started the new series of re-emerging after lockdown, and the idea that kind of cropped up with Marion's service, that actually this idea of anxiety and people being a little bit worried about sort of rejoining society in the way before lockdown sort of thing. And so basically, well, that's why we kind of had this mental health focus this week. And we wondered, what advice could you give in your professional capacity? Could you give someone who is feeling anxious about re-emerging after lockdown? What help can you offer them? Or what, and actually, second part to that, what might their anxieties look like?
Okay, well, I think we should first say how understandable it is to feel anxious about it. It's been such a weird period of time and such a long time now, sort of over a year of our lives looking completely different to how they were before. So if that is impacting on anyone's mental health, firstly, just to say that it's completely normal, very understandable, and you certainly wouldn't be on your own in feeling like that. So I think a lot of people are anxious about, in terms of the COVID aspect, is it safe to go outside? Are people going to be keeping their distance? Will people be masked? What will it be like? So just that unknown element, fear about catching the virus, and also about giving it to people that you care about is a big thing for a lot of people. But also there's just this element of sort of life has changed, and perhaps will I still enjoy the things that I used to, or will things still be the way that they were before? Just that sort of sense of apprehension. I think there's a lot of anxieties out there that lots of people could be having. And in terms of you go.
I was just going to say, we spoke about that quite a lot actually over the last couple of weeks. Is actually, what are we getting back to? Yeah. Is it going to be the same? Is it is it going to look different? Sorry, go on, carry on.
Just in terms of your question about what advice is there about it, and I guess the main thing that I would say is to sort of take it nice and slow. The classic CBT thing is to write it down, and I would definitely say start off by thinking about what are the things I want to get back to at some point. Write a lovely list of them, and then try and put them in some type of order from what might be the least scary, something that feels more manageable, right up to whatever is the most scary, the thing that feels really difficult. So you might start off by saying, okay, the least scary would be if I went for a walk with a friend that I really trust. And so I would say, really just make a commitment with yourself to do that. Plan a day, plan a time when you're going to try and give that a go. Then just stick to it, see how you get on. Start nice and small, repeat that as many times as you need to until you feel confident enough to try the next thing on your list, and then just build up gradually.
And so, I mean, I guess that it's going to be quite common. We're going to expect that people in general are going to be feeling quite anxious. I get that obviously some people will be really excited, but there will be quite a lot of us that will be feeling quite apprehensive. Where is the line between sort of feeling a normal amount of, anxiety and being able to deal with it, and perhaps then sort of thinking, okay, maybe I need to get some help, a professional help?
So a great question, because anxiety in itself isn't a problem. We all get anxious. There's nothing wrong with feeling anxious. And in fact, sometimes feeling anxious is helpful. If you think about when you're sort of worried about exams, that anxiety pushes you to revise and to work harder. So being anxious in itself is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly human. In terms of when it crosses that line, I think you have to think a bit more about impact. Right. So it might be perfectly normal that all of us feel that sort of sense of, oh, it might be really busy in town. Will I feel comfortable going? If you're really struggling with your anxiety, then I would suggest you want to be looking out for it really holding you back, sort of high impact, not being able to do the things that you want to do because that anxiety is stopping you. You might find that it impacts other areas of your life too, things like maybe not sleeping so well, maybe changes to your appetite, maybe sort of different physical sensations that you may notice. And again, perfectly normal for us all from time to time. But if you find that this is causing you a problem sort of longer term, it might be that this is a more significant issue for you, I guess.
So like if it's having quite a debilitating effect on your normal day-to-day activities that usually would have been normal. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. But to be fair, even the important thing is if you think that it's a problem, if you view that the anxiety to be a problem for you. It doesn't matter if actually you are able to get on with things and cope day to day. If it's a problem for you, it's always acceptable to seek help. You're the expert of your experience, and if you think that something isn't right, it's worth listening to that and trying to do something about it.
Well, kind of sticking with that, just sourcing help and advice that you can give. What about if you are trying to support someone who might be struggling? What advice can you offer? You know, someone who might be struggling. Struggling to support someone who is struggling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, absolutely. That's difficult too. And I think the first thing I would say is really to take the time to listen to them, really try and understand what their anxiety is about. Remember that anxiety isn't rational. So as much as you might try to help somebody to see that maybe they're not thinking in a hugely rational way, or you might try and sort of help change their thinking, actually you can't reason with anxiety. And so you might find that doesn't work the way you think it will. So instead, take the time to listen, to really hear what the problem is. The old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, is still true. So I think by all means go with that. Try and encourage those small steps like I've talked about. Sort of, shall we try and do this together? What might help you feel more comfortable to do this? And even if you can't help with the sort of direct cause of their anxiety, or the sort of the main anxiety they're experiencing, you can help with someone's general well-being. So things like keeping hydrated, eating regularly, trying to get a good night's sleep, keeping active, all of this stuff helps with that general sense of well-being. And if we're generally looking after our well-being, it tends to help sort of general sense of anxiety as well. So if you're a supporter, looking after that aspect can be really useful for reducing general anxiety levels as well. But it is tricky. And one thing I would also say is that there are mental health professionals for a reason, because actually this can be a hard thing to do on your own. And also to, if you are supporting someone, to feel able to encourage them or perhaps suggest to them whether they might benefit from external support as well.
Yeah, definitely. But I just, something you said made me think, because you sort of talked about anxiety, and of course we had this question come in: what's the Bible? What about the Bible verse, "Do not worry"? You can look in your Bibles and to see whether, actually, I'll pull it up. Is it Matthew 6:34? There are a few other places that has got a similar sentiment, but I think that's the one that most people sticks in their mind. And the interesting thing with that is there seems to be a difference between whether you consider it to be worry or anxiety, and depends on the Bible translation you're using. And I think it's interesting what you say about anxiety not being rational, because looking at because I can just Google it here. Looking at the Greek for what that is in Matthew 6:34 is from a root that means to be separated, to be fractured, to be broken into parts, which I thought was really interesting. But this idea that it's not, there's things that we should be legitimately concerned about, and actually what this passage is getting us to is, or trying to get us away from, it'll highlight, I guess, that there is a line, like you say, where, okay, it's okay to be concerned about something. It's okay to think, oh, I'm going somewhere different, and especially in COVID times, perhaps I need to do different things to stay safe. But then, as you say, it crosses a line into anxiety and not being rational. And I think the Bible actually with this verse is highlighting exactly that. There's a difference between things we should concern ourselves with and being in a state of anxiety, anxiousness, which is something we need to look out for and take steps to help, as you say.
I think we'd all agree that worrying isn't nice. Nobody wants to do it. If you could just stop it and turn it off, you absolutely would. And I think that's a key thing about this as well, is that advice from the Bible of do not worry, it stands. It's that worrying is mostly a pointless exercise. That doesn't mean it's easy to stop doing it, but there is little often to be gained from worrying. And that's what I take from that. What Jesus doesn't say is stop worrying right now, turn it off. He doesn't say that. He doesn't sort of imply that you could just stop doing it. He just says that it's not a good idea. And I think we could all agree on that. It's just perhaps some of us need a bit more help to get to that point where we're managing or reducing our worries.
Yeah,
perhaps sometimes a greater perspective as well of our worries, perhaps, you know, perhaps, I don't know. Yeah,
so I think as Christians, some Christians kind of are in that, well, if you're a worrier, then you're not doing you're getting Christianity wrong. And of course it's not that at all, is it? But it's one of those charges that's been levied at me before of, oh well, you know, you don't have enough faith. And it's easy to kind of just get stuck in that, and it's in that sort of thinking. And I've been there, and it's easy to think about with mental health that, oh, I don't need to worry about that. It's not going to affect me. But that's not how it works, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, I think if you are someone who thinks, oh, mental health, no, that's not me, I'm afraid we all have mental health in the same way as we all have physical health, and that can change and vary at points in our lives. The same is true for your mental health. So yeah, we're not exempt from that at all. And in fact, it makes me think of the verse in the Bible that there's a really lovely Message translation of, don't be so naive and self-confident as to think that you are exempt from the troubles of this world, because that's not true. And actually, I think Marion said it a couple of weeks ago that Jesus doesn't promise us an easy time of it. It doesn't say, oh, you won't have any problems because you follow me. Instead, what he offers is support through it.
It also kind of jumps back to what John was preaching on a few weeks earlier than that, and sort of saying, well, we can't just disregard science entirely. There is evidence to suggest that these things, you know, are real and exist, and we can't just sort of, like you say, Heather, we can't just be naive about it. So what is there something perhaps that you could, advice that you would give to someone perhaps who is struggling with anxiety or depression, but is struggling to admit it to themselves, sort of thing? You know, how do you sort of, I mean, you say that you know yourself and you know where that line is, but what happens if you're sort of beating yourself up to the point where you're not getting that help? You know, what can you suggest for someone who's in that situation?
That's such a tough position to be in, and I think you're right to point out that is the reality for some people. I guess I would say whether it's from listening to this or from your own thinking, if you're wondering actually if there might be something more going on for you, even if that's an uncomfortable realization, there is so much out there in terms of resources. Have a look at the National Mind website. It has a lot of information about common mental health problems. You could take a look there and try to understand a little bit more about what might be going on. Perhaps consider talking to a friend that you really trust, someone that you feel able to confide in. Of course, pray about it. That seems like a very reasonable suggestion. And that there is support out there. There's a lot of support available for people with mental health difficulties. A lot of it is free and widely accessible. So I would definitely say that anyone can access support if they want to. There's no such thing as there's no problem too small or coming too soon, or sometimes people worry, oh, there's people out there worse off than me. That does not matter. As mental health professionals, we're interested in your own experience, and whatever that might be. There's no judgment. There's no sense of who's worse off than who or anything like that. It's just about trying to get people help, and nobody deserves to live in anxiety or depression, and that I would definitely just encourage people to start exploring it and think about, if you are denying that in some way or trying to hide from it, does that help, or would it be, if we confront it, that might be uncomfortable, it might be scary, but might there be something to gain from it? Might in the long term it help things? Does that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? Is that someone in that position is probably denying it, or as you say, just sort of trying to hide it because it's quite frightening to face it, I suppose. Yeah,
absolutely it is.
And on that note, Joe, we've just had another question pop in, which I thought was worth discussing off the back of that. What about people who find it hard to admit to their family that they're really worried about coming out of lockdown?
I think that the thing about problems like this is that if we're all frightened to admit to people that we're worried about coming out of lockdown, that means that we're all worried and not telling each other. So you feel like you're on your own, but actually you might not be. There's bound to be other people out there that feel the same way. I would certainly say that whoever has posted that, you're certainly not on your own there. And it can be a difficult thing to admit to your family. I would suggest that if you feel able to speak to one particular person to share your anxieties, then you may well find that they feel similarly. Or as I mentioned earlier, this idea of trying to decide what you feel comfortable with first. So if there is something you think you might feel able to do, could you suggest doing that first if you'd like to see people, but you want to have a bit more of an idea of what's going on? Would you feel comfortable having them to your garden instead of going to theirs? Things like that. So trying to think about what is in my realm of control or my comfort zone as such, what might I feel able to do? But as difficult as it is, most people find that when they do open up to someone they trust, the response back is warm, positive, compassionate, helpful. So I always think sometimes it's worth that risk of taking that step forwards. But that is something that you have to sort of decide for yourself, which is difficult in its own way.
I forgot to mention earlier that obviously if you post something to Slido, it is automatically anonymous. So there you go. Sorry, I meant to say. Yeah, thank you, Heather. That was that's really helpful. And I think actually probably does that lead us into something else that I was going to say? Maybe. No, it doesn't. It's all right.
You can say it anyway if you like.
No, it's fine. It's all right. I think Joe will have another question, I expect.
Okay. Well, I guess, we've spoken about how someone might support someone who is struggling. Just thinking maybe a little bit more broadly, as us as Romsey Methodist Church, or just being part of the community in and around Romsey, what can we do to support each other? Because you say that it's probably a lot more common than we all think it is, and unfortunately we don't all go around. Well, fortunately we don't go around with signs over our heads saying I have depression or I have so what can we do to support each other? And is there something that is there a way in which we should be mindful of how we're supporting, how we're helping, how we're I guess there's so much stigma around mental health. How do we sort of have those conversations in the right way?
Again, good question. I think that what I said earlier, sort of really listening and really listening rather than what we often do, which is waiting for our turn to talk, but properly listening to what somebody has to say and taking the time to do that is really valuable. Not making assumptions or trying to sort of put our opinion on someone else, just really taking that time out. You don't have to understand exactly what someone else is feeling, but you want to sort of try and imagine what it might be like for them to feel that, and appreciate that it was probably very difficult for them to tell you, and to acknowledge that, and to think what a privilege it is actually if somebody discloses something about their mental health to you, and to take that seriously. But otherwise, to just be really compassionate. Sometimes it can be helpful to think, what would I offer to do if this was a physical health problem? So sort of as churches, we're really good at if somebody breaks their leg or has a physical health problem and they can't get out and they can't do things, then we're great at providing meals or going round, contacting people to check that they're okay. All that stands with mental health. And still volunteer to help in exactly exactly the same way, because those are still likely to be struggles for somebody. So I think that kind of compassion is so important. And with regards to the lockdown things about sort of trying to help and support people who might be anxious about that, again, that lovely encouragement, that support about small steps, and respecting that perhaps other people don't feel as comfortable as we do. You mentioned earlier about some people being really excited about coming back, and you might think, oh, I'm quite happy to get within 2 meters of somebody, or I'm not sure I need my mask, but actually respecting that somebody else might not feel that confident or that comfortable, and therefore it's important that we all kind of play the same game or follow the same rules so that everybody feels comfortable.
Yeah, I personally find that really helpful with like imagining it's a physical illness, and then how would you respond then? Because it immediately takes away that there is I don't know if it's so much a stigma, but a sort of I think people find it harder to engage if with mental health. There's just something there that's sort of but actually, by thinking about it that way, it does, for me, it just takes that away. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, I can get on, I can be compassionate and do something to help then. And that's great.
Also, we are quite British in the way that we would perhaps sort of ask someone how they are. And typically, you know, our response is usually fine, not too bad. All things considered. But I remember lovely member of the church, Ros Hatch. Do you remember Ros Hatch? She was and she used to come into choir every week, and she used to always say to me, "How are you, Joe?" And then she used to ask me again, because it was this idea of ask twice. Ask twice. You know, because it's making sure that we've kind of really, you know, genuinely sort of caring about our neighbour, isn't it?
Totally. And there's so much to be said for that. If you haven't heard from somebody for a while, or you have noticed that perhaps somebody you haven't seen yet when you might have expected to, or then do reach out to them and ask, how are you? And ask twice, because you're right. We do tend to say, oh yes, I'm fine. And actually, if you're, how are you really? Or tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling. Sometimes you might get a slightly different answer. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. I know that obviously we've put in a bunch of links in the comments, and they're all worth checking out, aren't they? For the stats or places to kind of jump to. And the Slido link, I think, is still going to be on, isn't it, Jace? So if there are still some questions even after this week, I say after this week, after this goes out, we could still kind of hey, there we go. Great.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah, you could still pop in and we could ask you. But I know that, Heather, you wanted to kind of give this idea of signposting in terms of what mental health professional support kind of program schemes and what is out there.
This is where I need to get fast with the links. Hang on.
There's no pressure. There is support out there, and I think that's really important to get across. So anywhere in England, you have access to free psychological therapies. And in Hampshire, if you live in the majority of Hampshire, especially in Romsey, then your service is iTalk, where I work. It is free psychological therapies available to anyone who might be struggling with their mental health. There's more on our website about what kind of service we are and who might benefit from our support. And you can refer yourself online really easily. You can book yourself in for an appointment, just like if you were trying to book a gym class, which I think is such an amazing thing to be able to do. If
like going to see the mental GP. There we go.
Exactly. So definitely take a look at that if you think that you could benefit from additional support. Don't be put off by the fact that I work there. You can say on your referral that you know me, and I promise we will not speak to each other if you're worried about that at all. Which is a fair point.
Yeah, no, totally.
I would also, particularly about lockdown, if that is a worry for you, this idea of coming out of lockdown, we know it will be a worry for a lot of people. So actually at iTalk, we have developed a course specifically about that. So it will be a 6-week course you can access through Zoom about any anxiety you might have about leaving lockdown. So that might be worth being aware of.
I think if I got the link for that, I'll pop it in
you may
there.
well do.
I've popped it in.
I know that obviously iTalk ended up putting up some great little videos, didn't they, as well, during lockdown?
Yeah, and those are all available on our website. If you go to italk.org.uk, as Jason just had it up, and then to resources and wellbeing videos. They're really short videos of just a few little techniques that you can use if you're struggling with things like worrying or unhelpful thoughts. There's a lot of good stuff there. And the Solent Mind website as well is full of really helpful resources. Solent Mind has so many brilliant services available across Hampshire. It's definitely worth having a look at, and check out social media for both Solent Mind and iTalk, especially next week. Solent Mind's campaign is about Get Back to Nature, which I know loads of people have found to be so helpful during this period of lockdown. So worth looking out for that as well.
Brilliant. Sorry, I just had three thoughts come to me all at the same time. Yeah, I don't know what to go with.
Pick one.
Oh, I was going to say, if there's anyone who happens to be watching outside of Hampshire, then obviously iTalk is mainly for Hampshire. But there, so that if you were looking for your local IAPT service, isn't it? It's called. So that's, I guess, what you could search for.
Absolutely. So there is a part of a national scheme or initiative called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. So if you are outside of the Hampshire area, then if you do a quick Google search for my local IAPT service, so IAPT or IAPT service, and then your area, so wherever you are, you will be able to find your equivalent. And as I say, it's free, effective talking therapy is available. So it's always worth having a look.
Or at the very least, I suppose your GP would know exactly where to refer you anyway. So
if you really don't know where to start, that's absolutely fine. And a really good place to go is always going to be your GP, to just make that first appointment. Take someone with you if you want to. A lot of GP appointments are even by phone now, which is just that bit easier. But you don't have to talk to your GP. The vast majority of IAPT services like iTalk will take self-referral. You can, as I say, refer via our website really easily or by calling in. So if you don't want to talk to your GP, you don't have to, but it is a fantastic starting point if you're really not sure what to do.
And a bunch of the links that we've also put up are really helpful for if you're trying to support someone who is struggling as well. So yeah, I mean, even just making if you are supporting someone who is struggling, then make sure that you check those out as well, even if your mental health is beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, yes, this is a great thing to look at, Jason. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot that I meant to say it earlier, and then I didn't. Because we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And I was doing some sort of like some googling in preparation for this evening to think about what we might come up, and I found out this 5 ways. And I found a blog post someone was writing about the 5 ways, and I've lost that. But I found the 5 ways themselves. But it was really interesting to me because the kind of point they made is that a lot of things in there were things that a good church kind of will be doing naturally, and it kind of goes back to that question of what can we as a church be doing to help with people's mental health. That actually a lot of that is just be a good church. and this is kind of some of the specific things. So you've got like learning and connect, and there are some really specific things in there. Give and be active. Maybe we're not so active in the church. We could be better at that, but it just struck me as really interesting that actually we can be a great place to help, not kind of help kind of it, you know, like you do, Heather, but just to be a healthy place to be, and to be a place that promotes well-being just generally. I think I might just zoom into that to keep it.
I think that's such a valid point, because again, as we were saying earlier, everybody has mental health. It's just a spectrum. It's a continuum as to where you're at each time. So the 5 ways to well-being are all about 5 things that are suggested you do to try and keep yourself well, that sort of help with your general sense of well-being. So yeah, keep learning, connect, take notice, give, be active. All of these are really valuable things to be doing to try and keep yourself well, or to be looking after yourself. more. Some Christians are a bit uncomfortable with the idea of mindfulness, which is what a lot of people think of when they hear this idea of take notice. But actually, it's appreciating creation, sort of paying attention to what's going on around you, which is hugely valuable and so in keeping with our faith. So don't be put off by that at all.
Yes, actually, interesting to say that there was a great article in the latest Christianity magazine by the guy from Red Collective, whose name escapes me. But it's if you Google it, you'll find it. It's really good. If it's only in the printed magazine, then give me a shout and I'll get it to you somehow. But it's really good, and a good thinking about mindfulness from a Christian perspective. That's great.
And just to jump on your points as well, it's obviously, as you say, we all want to be there to help and support each other as well, and that's what that is part of what a church is there to do, is to be one together. And actually, even if you do need some support and go and get some professional help, which of course, if you need, go for it. But one of the first things that they do check with you is what kind of support network have you got around you? Who can you rely on? Who can you talk to? Who can you lean on? You know, so
yeah, it's really important to have that support network. And you're right, as a church, we want to be that for people. We want to be the support network.
I think that's I think we should stop. Well, we could carry on for ages, but that's great. Thank you so much, Heather. That has been really helpful. And I'll try and remember it all.
Yeah,
it's on YouTube now forever. So
excellent. But no, thank you. There's some great resources. It's just interesting, sort of looking at what 5 ways to wellbeing. Just those big orange self-refer online links at the bottom. Just highlight how easy it is.
Absolutely, it could be simpler. Take it. Take a look.
Yeah. Well, I'll end with the prayer, I guess. This is where I normally say I don't know what's going on next week. I still don't know what's going on next week. So. Something will happen, but otherwise, let's end with the prayer.
Cool.
Father God, as we think about re-emerging from lockdown and how we feel about that, Lord, for some of us it's still really difficult and will still be for a while. We know, Lord, that you will be with us in that struggle, and we pray for ourselves, for anyone who's feeling anxious at this time, that you would guide us through that and guide us to who we need to talk to and what we need to do to help ourselves, perhaps. We pray for the church generally, for all of us, as we seek to support each other, that you would help us to be good at that. Amen. Super. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining in. Thank you for the fab questions and feedback and everything. And we'll catch you all again soon.
Will do.